As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts grey, are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses.
What was the feminist movement like in Northern Ireland in the early 1980s?
Well, it was very exciting. There was a lot going on, and there was some very interesting people getting involved in all sorts of initiatives, that were to do with women's liberation, women's education, women's politics. There was a lot of activity, and there was different organisations that set up at the time.
I think the women's centres and the women's organisations was established in the early 80s, and I think part of the reason for that to be established, there was nothing out there for women or where women could go.
Well, WRDA, or its forerunner, Women's Education Project, would have formed in 1983, and that would have covered a period where the conflict was still ongoing. Like probably most organisations at that time, it was a case of doing what you could but keeping your head down, because your issues just weren't on the agenda.
Well, it was started by a group of women who were involved in adult education, for example, the Workers' Education Association, and different initiatives. And at the same time as the Women's Education Project started, the Belfast City Council also initiated a post for a women's officer, which Margaret Ward took up, who was also later a director of the WRDA. So Margaret and I worked together quite a bit at that time. So there was quite a lot of activity around education and the idea of women's education, because it was clear from the kind of numbers of local women's groups that were setting up, for mutual support, for shared childcare, all these kinds of things in some community centres, that there was a hunger there for getting together and for just talking together and for education. So it was really a great time, and there was no pressure for accreditation. It was much later that the kind of neoliberal agenda that was very economy focused had a big influence. So at the time, what was wonderful about it is that we could respond to need, and that's what we did.
Okay, so my first day at the Women's Education Project, I was recruited as the administrator with WEP in September 1988. My contract would have been for a year because it was just a training post, but what happened was the organisation secured funding from DHSSPS, and the management committee at the time made a decision that my post would be made permanent. So I'm still here to this day as well. And I remember my first day going in and having to type up a letter for Joanna, and it was on a typewriter that had a correction tape on it, and I remember thinking at the time, God, this is very upmarket, that's what it is. And as a result of Joanna encouraging me to do a training, especially in IT, I developed a love in IT, and shortly after I did my training in IT, WRDA purchased, WEP purchased the first computer, which was an Amstrad with a dot matrix printer. But thank goodness the technology has changed to this day now.
In 1992 then, Women's Education Project's membership voted to rename the organisation the Women's Resource and Development Agency, And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how that decision came about and what the transition was like.
Well, that was very simple, really. A simple explanation for that is that funding was becoming difficult. I mean, there were times when we had no funding. And Geraldine and I worked a few months without any pay because there was just no funding. And, you know, we just worked our, you know, backsides off to get it. And we did, but as Geraldine will tell you. So, I mean, it was a simple issue, really, because it came down to funding. We were finding it very difficult to get funding for education purely. And in the Department of Health and Social Services, there was a voluntary activity unit where there were some very progressive civil servants. And they wanted to fund us, but they couldn't fund something that was called education because it would come under Department of Education, and Department of Education weren't going to fund us. So they had funded, this is the DHSS as it was then, had funded the Women's Information Group, and they funded community development type of projects. So it was they who said, look, we would like to fund you, but you will have to be called something slightly different. So in the end, we came up with the name, the Women's Resource and Development Agency. And at the time, there was some kind of reservations about losing education from the title, but we just thought, actually, they were very supportive, and in fact bought this building in partnership with the Joseph Rowntree Trust, Joseph Rowntree Trust, and the DHSS as a public-private partnership, which was very unusual. Bought this building, and this building has made such a huge difference. It has given stability to the organisation, and it was prior to the first ceasefires. So it was also inexpensive to buy. So it was, you know, and so that all worked. And so it was really it was for practical reasons, really. It wasn't because of a change of emphasis. I think, you know, what the Women's Education Project did, and what it was successful at doing, was combining like a feminist approach with community development and educational responses to working class women's groups. Didn't change. That's continued.
I think it was 1994 we made the transition from Women's Education Project to Women's Resource and Development Agency, and then shortly after moved to this building. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your memories of that transition.
It happened very soon after I joined the Women's Education Project. I remember the meetings up in that top attic in the WEP. I remember coming down with Joanna and seeing this building. I remember the excitement around it. I remember thinking the new name speaks more to what we were doing. The education was important, but it was also about resourcing and developing and supporting the development of women's groups, etc. I can remember Kathleen Feenan of the Women's Information Project, which was such a fantastic project, absolutely brilliant project. I remember Kathleen determined she was going to have that front room downstairs, and she got the room at the back in the end, because we were the landladies and she wasn't. But yeah, I do remember it. And then I remember we were able to buy this building at a time when that just was a very difficult thing to do, but it was a very brave, courageous thing to do, and I think a very wise thing to do, because it really grounded us with regards to funding applications and that we owned this building. It was quite amazing, really, that we did it.
And the other thing, of course, I will never forget is those first impressions of the WRDA. And Joanna came in for a couple of weeks, just off and on, just to give me some support and help me take on the role. And I mean, I just had this impression of a really well-functioning organization, a culture of care and respect. And so it seemed to me what I needed to do was to work hard at just sustaining what was already there, and kind of keep things steady until I could really kind of grasp what needed to be done. And of course, it was absolutely stony broke.
WRDA has been a great organisation. It had great foundations when I came in. The one thing I thought it didn't have as much, it had this fantastic foundation of working with women in the community facilitator programme, fantastic, both in terms of the health information it imparted, but also the training that it gave to women and the qualification they got. So all of that was great, and that was running smoothly. It didn't need any input particularly from me. What I felt that it lacked was greater visibility generally as an organisation that it was articulating women's interests and taking part and critiquing what was out there. And so I think that my role, and I think I did achieve that, was to bring up WRDA as that authoritative voice for women, not the only voice out there, but an authoritative voice that the media could come to, politicians could have faith in, policymakers, that it could go out to different policy fora and hold its own and put forward really strong issues and well argued.
Well, I think it's important to say that WRDA does not compete with its members, in terms of like the women's centres and women's groups. So we're not usually, competing for the same funding. And WRDA tends to do projects when there's seen to be a gap. So for example, the MAS project, the Maternal Advocacy and Support Project, is a really good example of that in terms of the lack of provision for women experiencing perinatal mental health issues. So that's a really good example. Like over the years as well, we, like 2 years ago, as a partnership, that was WRDA and Women's Support Network and Northern Ireland Rural Women's Network came together, and we submitted a successful application for the Community Renewal Fund. And just earlier this year, we heard again in the same partnership along with Reclaim the Agenda, we submitted a successful partnership to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And I have often said that, ourselves alone just doesn't cut it anymore. I think that the best way to deal with addressing inequalities and trying to make our society, like a more equal and equitable place for us all to live, we've got to work in partnership.
I think one of the things that first springs to my mind, and I've kind of already touched on this, but is WRDA's membership. So a lot of the members would be drawn specifically from the women's sector here, and I think a couple of things WRDA does really, really well is just like information sharing with the members, and also providing them with networking opportunities through events and things like that. I think just having those opportunities to like engage with other people from the women's sector is hugely important for strengthening, the sector as a whole. So yeah, WRDA would hold a lot of like pretty major events throughout the year. So yeah, it does that really well. I think another way that WRDA builds the resilience is just by offering, projects and services that are really well run, really well managed, and you know, if you get a chance to engage in them, will be helpful to you. Through the management committee itself, like we would have, you know, members who are drawn from other women's organisations, which just, you know, helps strengthen ties. But in particular, I think one thing WRDA does very well is like partnership working. So like joint projects that other women's sector organisations are involved in, and also of course the involvement in the Women's Regional Consortium. I really think one thing I've seen WRDA do very, very well over the last few years is like joint applications for funding for projects with other women's organisations, where it's not about WRDA taking the lead. It really is about bringing those other organisations together and everybody working well. And if another organisation is actually the lead partner in something, then that's absolutely fine. And I think we've just seen some really good successes from those joint projects.
From some of the information we get, it can save, and some of the work saves lives, you know, and our work particularly with the Public Health Agency, and as we've evaluated, and that's something else that WRDA does well. Whatever it does, it evaluates it, and I think building that in to the work that we do, so that it doesn't get stale, it changes, it develops, it improves, it shifts as needed, but the essence of the community facilitator program has stayed the same, but it has grown, and the leadership throughout the years, we've had different ways of thinking about it, but it really has stood the test of time. Your question about WRDA's achievements, how would you measure that? WRDA commitment to partnership working. It's in the DNA of WRDA to have good partners, or to have partnerships as one of the mission of the organisation, and it's always been a key objective with any of our strategic plans, is partnership working. And that's not easy. There have been times when the relationships weren't at their best, and it wasn't easy to keep the door ajar or the door open around partnership working. We're at a very good stage in terms of partnership working now, and it is key to the survival and the sustainability of WRDA. You only have to look at the diversity of the income base that is WRDA. A lot of that is based on that hallmark of partnership, and I think it is through that WRDA has gone on a journey from survival to sustainability through partnership. And if that is the one thing that will be my biggest memory, is to utilise partnership as a means of sustainability and staying with it. And I think it's its greatest achievement.
The fact that WRDA is still here after all this time, not many organisations make it this far, that in itself is just an absolutely massive achievement.
I would just say huge congratulations. You're doing amazing work. Keep doing it and mind yourselves in it, because it's hard work. It is hard work, but well done.
I would just say my main message would be, hopefully we'll have another 40 years, and hopefully I'll still be around for it. Yeah, I think hitting 80 years, wow. I mean, 40 years is brilliant, but that would be even better. So yeah, that is my message.
I just think, you know, to be so proud of both the longevity of WRDA, how it's continued to evolve as an organisation, and I don't think it has compromised any of its principles. It still empowers women within the community. It still delivers really innovative programmes, and you know, it's still an organisation that tries to particularly convey the experiences of working class women, women in the community, women struggling on breadlines, and keeping that in the forefront of policymakers.
Oh, well done, you people. Yeah, big hug.
My message for WRDA's future is to keep true to the ethos and values of WRDA, and in particular the feminist values, that they're not lost. I think it's important that as time progresses and new staff and management committee come on board, that they are made aware of WRDA's feminist ethos. I think WRDA is very good at moving with the times in terms of what the current needs of women are, and hopefully WRDA can continue to keep this up and not lose sight of the issues that women face. And I think this is a really good strength that WRDA has, and I just hope that that does continue in the future. Don't chase funding now, and it's a case of just keep up the brilliant work and continue to overcome the challenges faced in the future. So yes, bring it on.
No more the drudge and idler, tender toil where one reposes, but the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts stop